My name is Thea Ballinger, and I was 33 years old on the afternoon my mother handed me a serving spoon, and then handed a stranger a lie about who I was. It was Thanksgiving Day. There were 14 people seated at my parents' table, and I had cooked for every single one of them, starting at 4 o'clock that morning. Grady's mother, a polished woman named Rosalind Ashworth, began to rise from her chair to shake my hand as I came through the doorway carrying the gravy. My mother reached over, laid 2 fingers on Rosalind's wrist, and eased her gently back down into her seat. "Oh, honey, don't get up for her," my mother said, with the soft little laugh she saves for things she finds charming. "That's just Thea. She's the help. She's been doing for us for years now." 14 people heard it. 2 of them laughed into their napkins. Not one of them corrected her. I did not cry, and I did not set the gravy boat down hard, and I did not leave the room. I walked the whole length of that table. I placed the boat beside my father's plate, and I turned the handle toward his right hand, because that is what 9 years of learning to be useful will teach you to do without thinking. Then I straightened a spoon that was already perfectly straight, and I smiled at Rosalind Ashworth, and I told her that dinner would be on the table in 10 minutes. What none of them knew, what not one living soul beneath that roof knew, was that the roof itself belonged to me. Not in some sentimental way, not in the way people say a house holds their childhood. Legally, recorded, stamped, indexed, and filed downtown, with my name typed on the line where my father's name used to sit. And there was one more thing they did not know. The quiet man 3 seats down, the one eating my cornbread dressing without a word, was the only other person alive who could prove it. 9 minutes later, my father would stand up with a glass in his hand, and he would announce to that table that he was selling the family home. He would explain, cheerfully, in front of everyone, exactly who was going to get the money, and I would walk out to my car, open the glove compartment, and come back inside carrying a folder. To understand why I kept that folder for 2 years without ever once opening it, you have to go back to a Tuesday morning in April of 2016, when my phone rang at 6 o'clock and would not stop. It was my father. He was not crying, because my father does not cry. Not then, and not for years afterward. He told me that my mother had gone down in the kitchen, on the tile between the stove and the sink, and that the ambulance had already come and gone. He said the word stroke very carefully, the way you pronounce the name of a stranger, as though saying it slowly might turn it into a mistake. I was living in Charlotte then, in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat that ran its dryers until midnight, and I had gotten used to falling asleep to the sound. I worked at a firm called Meridian Title and Escrow, and my whole job was closings. I read the documents that nobody reads. I found the errors that quietly cost people their houses, the wrong middle initial, the lien that was never released, the signature page that did not match the deed sitting underneath it. I was good at it. I was, if I am being honest with you, very good at it. And in 14 years, not one member of my family ever asked me a single question about what I did all day. I gave my notice on a Thursday. My manager, a woman named Marisol Vega, refused to accept it and put me on leave instead, because she said that people who go home to help almost never come back. I told her 6 months, and I believed it when I said it. It turned into 9 years. The house was at 41 Ashgrove Lane in Asheville, North Carolina, a white house with dark green shutters and a front porch my father built with his own hands, back in the summer of 1994. I moved back into my childhood bedroom on a Sunday, and by Wednesday I had a laminated schedule taped inside the kitchen cabinet door. Pills at 7, at 11, and at 6. Physical therapy on Tuesdays and Fridays at the clinic over on Marymount Avenue. Speech exercises at 4 in the afternoon, 30 minutes, no exceptions. Even on the days she swept the flashcards off the table and told me, with the half of her mouth that still worked, that she hated me. My sister Corinne was 29 that year. She came by on Sundays with a white box of pastries and a candle that smelled like fig, and she would sit on the edge of our mother's bed for about 40 minutes, holding her hand, crying beautifully, and then she would leave before supper. Everyone in that house called it devotion, and they said so out loud, at church, to anyone who asked. When I lifted our mother up off the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, nobody called it anything at all. That was simply Tuesday. My father ran a company called Ballinger and Sons Construction, though there were no sons and there had never been any sons. He was a man who believed that paperwork was a kind of personal insult, something invented by people who had never worked outdoors. He signed things. He did not read them. Once, early on, I offered to look over a subcontractor agreement for him, and he laughed at me across the kitchen table and told me not to worry my head about it. Then he said the thing he always said, the sentence that would eventually cost him everything he owned. Reading the fine print, he told me, is what women in offices are for. I want to be exact about how a daughter becomes a servant, because it never happens in one single afternoon. There is no meeting, and nobody votes, and no one ever says the words out loud. It happens the way frost happens, quietly, overnight, while you are asleep, and then one morning you look out the window, and the entire yard has turned white. It happened the first time my father's friends came for coffee, and he did not introduce me. It happened when the church directory listed our household as Everett and Junie Ballinger, and Corinne, and left me off the page entirely, and my mother said it was probably just a printing thing, and never called anyone about it. It happened on the day I noticed that when guests arrived at the front door, I had already begun standing up automatically, before a single person asked me to. If you are watching this, and you have ever been the one person in a family who does absolutely everything and gets thanked for nothing, tell me where in the world you are watching from, and stay with me tonight, because this story does not end anywhere close to where you think it does. By the autumn of 2016, I had stopped waiting for anybody to notice. In September of 2017, my sister decided she needed a room with good light to photograph inventory for her boutique. My bedroom had the best light in the house, and it faced south, and it had been mine since I was 6 years old. Nobody asked me anything. I came home from the pharmacy on a Thursday and found my mattress standing on its side in the hallway, and my books packed into a cardboard box with the word donate written across it in my sister's handwriting. I moved down to the basement, where the ceiling leaked in one corner when it rained hard, and the washer shook the floor on spin cycle. I put a rug down. I bought a lamp. I made it nice. I never mentioned it again, and in 8 years, not one person in that house ever asked me whether I minded. At Christmas in 2018, the photographer said family only for the picture in front of the fireplace, and my father agreed with him. Somebody handed me 14 coats. I stood in the doorway, holding them against my chest, while my family arranged themselves and smiled. That photograph still hangs in the upstairs hallway of that house today. If you look very carefully at the bottom left corner of the frame, you can see one of my hands. In June of 2019, Ballinger and Sons Construction collapsed. A commercial job out in Weaverville went bad. The bonding company came after him hard, and my father lost the business he had spent 31 years building from a single truck. He came home that evening and sat out in the driveway with the engine off for almost 2 hours. I brought him a glass of sweet tea. He took it out of my hand without ever once looking at my face. That was the month the mortgage stopped getting paid. I found the first notice in March, wedged underneath the phone bill on the counter, and when I asked my father about it, he told me it was handled. It was not handled, and it was never going to be handled. So I opened my laptop down in the basement, at a card table under a bare bulb, and I started a bookkeeping company for contractors, because contractors were the only people on earth I understood as well as I understood documents. I called it Ashgrove Ledger LLC, after the street, which at the time I thought was funny. My first client was a framer named Rayfield Doss, who paid me $400 a month, and who told everyone he knew in 3 counties. By 2021, I had 31 clients. By 2023, I had 68 clients, 3 employees who worked remotely, and a business bank account that nobody in my family had ever heard of. I worked from 9 at night until 2 in the morning, every night, after the pills and the dishes and the laundry and the speech cards. Then I got up at 6 and did the entire day again. Nobody asked. That is the part I need you to sit with. In 9 years, not one member of my family ever asked me what I was doing on that laptop at night. They knew that money was coming from somewhere, because the lights stayed on and the pantry stayed full, and to them that was simply weather. Rain falls. Lights come on. Thea is downstairs. Starting in March of 2019, I paid the mortgage on 41 Ashgrove Lane. It came to $1,847 every month. I paid it out of my own account, on the 1st, for 4 straight years. And I never mentioned it at dinner. Not once. Not even on the nights when my father complained about the price of gas. In October of 2020, I overheard my mother talking to our neighbor, Winnie Dockery, over the back fence. Winnie asked her who the young woman was that she kept seeing carrying in the groceries. My mother said, and I am quoting her word for word, because I have never been able to put it down, "Oh, that's just the girl who does for us." She knew I was standing at the kitchen window. She saw me through the glass. She lifted her hand and waved. In the spring of 2021, the roof failed over the back bedroom, and the estimate came to $11,400. I paid it in 2 installments to a roofer named Ezra Kittrell, who happened to be one of my clients. He stood with me in the driveway afterward, folded the check into his shirt pocket, and asked me quietly whether my father had any idea where that money had come from. I asked him not to say anything. He shook my hand. He kept my secret for 4 years without ever being paid to keep it, and I want his name spoken out loud in this story. If you have ever stood alone in a kitchen while the people you love were laughing in the next room, then you already know exactly what that silence sounds like, and I would honestly like to hear about it in the comments. Then came August of 2022, and my sister's wedding. It cost $86,000. There was a string quartet, and a florist driven up from Charleston, and a 4-tier cake that I was never offered a slice of. Grady Ashworth married Corinne beneath an arch of white roses at the Grove Park Inn, and my father cried at the altar, which I mention only because I had never seen him do it before, and I have never seen him do it since. I was not a bridesmaid. My sister explained, kindly, over coffee, that the dress color would wash me out. I was seated at table 9 with the children, next to a 4-year-old boy who spilled apple juice into my shoe during the toasts, and who was very sorry about it. Halfway through the reception, my mother came across the room, put her hand on my shoulder, leaned down close to my ear, and asked whether I would mind clearing the head table, because the catering staff was slow, and she did not want Rosalind Ashworth to see dirty plates sitting out. So I stood up in my one good dress, and I cleared my sister's wedding table in front of 200 guests, and Fletcher Ashworth, Grady's father, pressed $11 into my palm as I passed him, because he assumed I worked there. I kept that money. It is in the folder. 3 months later, in November of 2022, I was carrying the recycling out to the curb, when I found an envelope my father had thrown away, still sealed. It was from Blue Ridge Community Bank. I stood there under the porch light and opened it, and I learned 2 things in about 90 seconds. The first thing was that the house was 90 days away from foreclosure. The second thing was that in July of 2022, 3 weeks before my sister's wedding, my father had taken out a second mortgage against 41 Ashgrove Lane for exactly $86,000 and had never told me and had never told anyone. He had borrowed the house I was paying for, and he had spent it on a party where I bussed the tables. I stood in that driveway for a very long time, holding the letter, listening to the television, laughing through the front window. Then I went inside, and I finished the dishes, and I said nothing at all. The man who finally called me back was named Odell Trask. He had known my father since high school, and he was 61 years old, a loan officer with a bad knee, and a habit of saying exactly one true sentence, and then waiting. He had been trying to reach my father by telephone for 7 straight months. We met at a diner on Patton Avenue on a Wednesday morning, and I brought a folder, because I always bring a folder. I showed him 4 years of canceled checks drawn on my account. I showed him the roofing invoice with my signature on it. I showed him the property tax receipts, and the homeowner's insurance, and the water heater, and the furnace repair from the January my mother could not get warm. Odell set his coffee cup down on the saucer and looked at me for a while. "Thea," he said. "Does he know?" I said, "He has never asked." Now here is what I did next, and I want it stated plainly and out in the open, because people are going to decide what to think about me, and they deserve the actual facts. The bank was going to foreclose in February. When a bank forecloses, it sells the debt, and there is nothing secret about that, and there is nothing illegal about it. Anyone with $73,000 and the willingness to read every page may participate. So Ashgrove Ledger LLC purchased the note on my parents' home for $73,500. Every dollar of it was earned in a basement between 9 at night and 2 in the morning, while my family slept peacefully upstairs in a house they believed they owned outright. That made me the lender. It did not make me the owner. What made me the owner was my father. In October of 2023, I sat him down at the kitchen table with a stack of paper and told him the bank had a solution, one that would stop the foreclosure and let them both stay in the house. That was completely true. It is called a deed in lieu of foreclosure. It meant that he would convey the property, and in exchange the entire debt would be extinguished, and nobody would ever come to the door to take the furniture away. He did not ask who was on the other side of the transaction. It was printed there on page 1, in 12-point type, in the same font as everything else. Grantee, Ashgrove Ledger, LLC. I looked at him across that table, and I said, "Dad, please, read it." He picked up the pen, and he laughed at me, the way he had laughed for 9 years. And he said, "That's what you're for, honey." He signed on the 16th of October, 2023. My mother signed on the line beneath his, without her glasses on, because they were upstairs, and she did not want to make the trip. It was recorded at the Buncombe County Register of Deeds on the 3rd of November, 2023, at 9:17 in the morning, in Book 61112, page 448. I did not tell them. I never charged them $1 of rent. I paid the taxes, and the insurance, and the water heater when it went out again in February. For 2 years I lived in the basement of a house that I owned. I served supper in a dining room that I owned, and I was called the help inside of it, by name, in front of guests. Why did I stay silent? I have asked myself that in the dark more times than I can count, and I have only ever found one honest answer, because some small, stubborn part of me was still waiting for one of them to ask, just one single time, what I did all day, waiting to be a daughter instead of a fixture. So I made myself a promise. I put the folder in the glove compartment of my 2011 Corolla, and I let it sit there through 2 winters and 2 summers, until the paper warped from the heat. I would stay quiet, I told myself. I would stay quiet right up until the day they tried to take from me something that was already mine. Thanksgiving fell on the 27th of November, 2025. I was awake at 4. A 22-pound turkey from the Ingalls on Merrimon, brined overnight in a cooler, out on the back porch. Cornbread dressing from my grandmother's recipe card, the only thing of hers anybody ever wanted. Green beans, sweet potato casserole, 2 pies, and rolls from scratch, because my father does not like store-bought rolls. I did not sit down one time between 4 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. 14 people came. My parents, Corinne and Grady, Grady's parents, Rosalind and Fletcher Ashworth, my Aunt Bertie and my Uncle Hollis, my cousin Shiloh and her boyfriend Dax, Pastor Quintero and his wife Neva, Odell Trask, whom my father had invited because he liked the idea of having a banker at his table, and one woman I had never met before in my life, named Bettina Voiles, who arrived in a gray blazer, carrying a leather portfolio, shook my hand at the door, and asked me whether I was the caterer. My mother said the thing about the help at 2:40 in the afternoon. I have already told you how I answered her, which was not at all. At 2:49, my father stood up and tapped his water glass with the edge of a butter knife. He said that it had been a hard few years. He said it was time for a new chapter. He announced that he and my mother were selling 41 Ashgrove Lane and moving down to Ormond Beach, Florida, and that the listing would go live on Monday morning at $520,000. That, he explained, was why Bettina had joined us. Bettina smiled around the table and raised her water glass an inch. Then he said that after paying off what he called the paperwork, every remaining dollar of the proceeds would go to Corinne and Grady for a down payment on their house in Biltmore Park. Rosalind Ashworth clapped her hands together. My sister put both hands over her mouth. Somebody said the word blessing, and then my father looked all the way down the table at me, still holding his glass, and he said the words I will hear on the last day of my life. And Thea will be just fine, he said. She's got her little jobs. She's always landed on her feet. And honestly, she's been living here rent-free off of us for 9 years, so it's about time she learned what it actually costs to keep a roof over your head. I looked at him, then I looked up. At the roof I had paid $11,400 to replace. I set my napkin down beside my plate. I said, "Excuse me." I walked out the front door in November, in my apron, with flour still on my sleeve, and my hands did not begin shaking until I reached the car. I opened the glove compartment. The folder was exactly where it had been for 2 years, warped along the spine from the summer heat, with an $11 bill paper clipped to the inside cover. I came back in through the front door. I did not sit down. I said, "Dad, you can't sell this house." He laughed, and he asked me, in front of everyone, whether I was planning to stop him. And I said, "I don't have to stop you. You can't sell it. I own it." Silence has a texture to it. I had never felt that particular one before in my life. Somewhere down the table, a fork touched the edge of a plate, and it sounded like a car going through a guardrail. My father said, "What did you just say to me?" I opened the folder, and then I did the thing I have done for a living for 14 years, which is to put the paper down in front of the person who never bothered to read it. The general warranty deed, signed by Thea Ballinger, on the 16th of October, 2023. Signed by Junie Faye Ballinger, on the line directly beneath his. The recording stamp from the Buncombe County Register of Deeds, dated the 3rd of November, 2023. Book 61112, page 448. The assignment of the note from Blue Ridge Community Bank to Ashgrove Ledger LLC. The wire confirmation, $73,500. The Articles of Organization for Ashgrove Ledger LLC, listing exactly one member, Thea Marguerite Ballinger. 47 canceled checks, $1,847 each. The roofing invoice, $11,400, paid in full. And the second mortgage, $86,000. Executed on the 9th of July, 2022. I laid that last page down softly, in front of my sister, and turned it around so she could read it right side up. I said, "Corey, that's your wedding." My father's face had gone the color of dishwater. He said that I was lying. He said he had never signed any such thing in his life, that he would remember it, that no man alive would sign away his own house at his own kitchen table. He stood up so fast that his chair went over backward onto the floor, and he said it again, louder, to the whole room, that his daughter was a liar and had always been jealous of her sister. And that is when I said, very quietly, "Odell." Odell Trask set down his fork. He wiped his mouth with my mother's good linen napkin, and he folded it, and he took his time about it. "Everett," he said, "sit down." He told them that he had processed the file himself. He told them that he had called this house 40 times in 2022, and left messages, and driven out here twice. He said that he had sat in this very dining room in October of 2023, in the chair Dax was sitting in now, and had watched my father sign. He said that he had asked him, out loud, "Everett, do you want to read this through first?" And that my father had waved his hand and gone into the den to watch the game. Then Odell looked around the table, at every single face, and he said, That girl kept this family in this house for 4 years, and not one of you ever noticed." He turned to my mother. "Junie," he said, "she is not the help. She is your landlord." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then my sister started crying, and once she started, the truth came out of her in pieces, the way things do when a person has been holding them too long. She had known about the $86,000. She had known in July of 2022, a full month before the wedding. She had asked our father where the money had come from, and he had told her not to worry about it, and she had made a choice, deliberately, at 29 years old, not to ask a second question. Grady turned in his seat and looked at his wife the way you look at a stranger who knows your address. Fletcher Ashworth stood up. He said, very quietly, "Rosalind, get your coat." Pastor Quintero rose next, laid his palm flat on the tablecloth for a moment, and said that he believed he would take Neva home now. My cousin Shiloh was crying into her hands. Dax was staring at the wall. Bettina Voiles closed her leather portfolio, slid it into her bag, and on her way past me she paused and asked me softly whether I might ever want to list. My mother said my name, just my name, once, the way she used to say it when I was small and had gone too far into the yard. I said, "You told them I was the help." So I helped, and then, because I had been cooking since 4 in the morning, and I was not going to let it go to waste, I picked up the knife and I carved the turkey. I served 14 plates in a completely silent room. I ate standing at the kitchen counter, alone, the way I had eaten for 9 years. It was the last meal I ever ate in that house. The listing never went live. On the 2nd of December, I sent my parents a formal letter, because I am my father's daughter in exactly one respect, which is that I understand a document ends an argument, that words never will. The letter offered them a 12-month residential lease at $2,300 a month, which is market rate, or 120 days to vacate. I did not evict them. I have never evicted anyone in my life. My father did not sign for 91 days. He hired an attorney named Lyle Krantz, who took $2,500 from him, read the recorded deed one time, and told him there was nothing to be done, because there was nothing to be done. It had been signed freely, witnessed, notarized, and recorded in broad daylight. He had simply never read it. He is 67 years old. He took a job at the contractor desk of a building supply on Sweeten Creek Road, selling lumber to men who used to work for him. He signed the lease in March. The $86,000 was harder on my sister. Grady's clinic build-out had been financed with it, and when Fletcher Ashworth understood that his son's practice had been paid for with a stolen roof, he wrote a check to cover every cent of it, and then he stopped speaking to Corinne entirely. She closed the boutique in April. She and Grady are in counseling. She writes to me. I read every letter, and I have not answered one of them yet, and I am not proud of that, and I am not sorry either. My mother wrote to me once, in June, 4 pages, in the shaky left-handed script the stroke left her with. 3 of those pages explained why she had said what she said. The 4th page said that she was sorry. Odell Trask retired in January. He and I have breakfast on the first Saturday of every month at the diner on Patton Avenue, and he orders the same thing every time, and he insists on paying, and I let him. My Aunt Bertie called me at 11 o'clock that Thanksgiving night, crying, and said, "Baby, we all saw you standing there, holding those coats." She is 71 years old, and she is my family now. Uncle Hollis fixed my mailbox in the spring, and would not take gas money for the drive. I bought a house on Quarry Street in February. It is small, and it is nothing special, and the kitchen window faces east, so the light comes across the counter at 7 in the morning, while the coffee is going. Ashgrove Ledger has 11 employees now. I hired Ezra Kittrell's daughter last year. I still work late sometimes, but there is nobody upstairs waiting for anything. Here is what 9 years bought me, and I am giving it to you for nothing. Love that has to be earned is not love. It is employment, and the pay is always terrible. You will know that you have crossed the line from daughter into staff on the day you notice that you have begun standing up before anyone asks you to. Being needed is not the same thing as being valued, and a family that praises your usefulness has already told you, very plainly, which part of you they intend to keep. I do not think of what I did as revenge. Revenge is something you do to another person. Every single thing that happened at that table, my father did to himself. Over 9 years, one unread page at a time. All I ever did was keep the receipts, and finally stop apologizing for having them. I cook a great deal, actually. But I set the table before anyone arrives, and I count the chairs myself, and there is always one at the head with my name on it. Because a table where you are only allowed to serve is not a table you belong at, so I built my own. And I set it for people who stand up when I walk into the room.